Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Jim.
John.
Jim.
John.
Jim.
John.
I miss the times in between. I do. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 6, otherwise known from this point on as Episode 506.
I'm not tracking it anymore. I just, I show up when I'm told to show up. I try to come a little prepared, not a lot prepared. You come a lot prepared. I come a little prepared. And I think that says all you need to know about the two of us, ladies and gentlemen.
And if you've been listening for a while, if you haven't gathered that before, then you really haven't been listening at all. Anyway, today we're going to listen to Chapter 6 of The Linking Rings, which takes place in the heart of the Theatre District in London, a favorite place for both you and me. But before we do that, we're going to go into the Wayback Machine and listen to a couple thoughts from our friend Stan Allen.
What season was this? Because even I had to listen to it and go, this is fascinating stuff. I don't remember it as well as I should.
Well, you've cut me to the quick. I'm trying to think. There was a reason why we did it. It's got to be, okay. My guess offhand would be that it's from season 2, which was the Bullet Catch.
That
the
would be my
Bullet
guess.
Catch has a character who is very much like the Masked Magician.
Which leads us to this interview.
Yes, I'd done a bunch of research on the Masked Magician in order to write the Bullet Catch. And one name kept coming up, Stan Allen. Now, early on in my magic career, learning about magic, I'd said to you, I don't know which magazine to get. I can't really afford to get both of them. Do I get Genie or Magic Magazine? And you said you're going to be happy with either one of them.
It's true.
So I became a Genie guy. And then when Magic Magazine shut down, I don't know what Stan and Richard Kaufman worked out, but all the issues of Magic are now available for Genie subscribers online. So if you want to find something, it's really, really so.
Oh, you're kidding me.
I'm not kidding you. So now
That's
I have
brilliant.
access to both. And Stan was great to talk to about this. He was great to kind of dig back into what had happened with the Masked Magician and the details around that. I'll have a link in the show notes to that original interview in which he goes into much more detail, almost minute by minute, actually, about when the show came on and people's reactions and his understanding of who it was. So listen to that full interview if you want. But for this little segment, I wanted to find out when we chatted with him, okay, what's the big deal? Why is magic exposure a bad thing? Why is magic exposure a problem?
The problem in this is, to me, and the reason that I disliked this so much, had less to do with secrets being revealed and much more to do with disrespect for the art. If you showed, here's how linking rings are done, and then you say, okay, now you know how the trick's done. Now, watch this magician, watch Richard Ross perform this ring routine. And yes, he's using this technique. Wow. Now that's showing some respect, but it wasn't. They accented with secrets, which is down the list of importance in magic for any serious magician. And they emphasize the cheesy presentation, which the magic community is somewhat guilty of. We fed them that, so own up, you know. But they could have respected the arts. And that's what I disliked the worst about it. And I think it was Teller who said the problem with the Masked Magician was that it didn't go too far. It didn't go far enough. Because if you had given away the secret, if you just say, yeah, there's the secret, nobody cares. But if you showed how it was developed, if you showed all the work and you showed the cleverness of it, the angle is so perfect. When you get into all of that, now we become closer to an art. There's more to it than just, I'm holding the coin over in this hand, you idiot, and that's the shame of it. Also, the other thing that magic is, people are curious about it. Of course, they're curious. We have some, I guess, established curiosities. People love gamblers, cheats, that you just go, the mafia for a while, or the Vatican behind the scenes. There's just certain things that you love to pull the veil back on. And, the Da Vinci Code and other things. They've kind of pulled the veil back on some of this stuff. It's fun. We like it. Magic's one of those things. There's no question about it. You paint your van, such and such magic show, it might get broken into. Not to steal things, curiosity. It's not really malicious. But secrets are such a small part of our art. And I use the example of Who Shot JR?
Don't remember.
Okay. But you remember the campaign for a summer in 1980. Everybody was talking about Who Shot JR. Whoever came up with that, genius, absolute genius. And when the show finally aired, they got a 76% share with estimated 83 million people. That's more people that voted in the presidential election of 1980. So the world remembers it. And they remember that happening. And I asked people at a Magic Live one time, raise your hands if you remember the phrase, Who Shot JR? Almost the entire audience, certainly those of age. How many people remember who actually shot JR? 10%? 15%? I have no idea. I don't. And I think the answer there is as soon as we found out who shot it, well, we're not, that's our curiosity's gone now. So we don't remember it. So when magicians freak out about secrets, they're not going to remember. Don't add the fuel to it. Don't do anything like that. And so, but back to that, the reason I dislike the show so much because of the disrespect it showed to the magic world. Impact on the magic world. Gee, I mean, there's been exposures on exposures, exposures. The largest of all time probably was the Camel cigarette ads of 1933. It was huge. 1,200 newspapers and magazines. Big single page or double page spreads of it's fun to be fooled, but more fun to know. And 38 fairly popular effects were exposed. And that was a huge thing for about 8 months. And then the magic community moves on. At the time of The Masked Magician, we received information from people that said, I'm out of the business. I can't get booked. Nobody's going to book. I'm sorry. If The Masked Magician put you out of business, you were a little too close to being out of business already. If all of your stock is in your secret, if all you present out there is, I'm going to fool you with this trick, well, that's a bad investment. Nobody cares about the secrets. They're not going to remember the secret. They're going to remember, what's the old expression? They're going to remember how you made them feel. That's it.
Just for you purists out there, the full quote from Maya Angelou is, I learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah. It's a great quote. Great
Yeah.
quote.
And most things online say it's from her. There's a couple things that suggested there was another version somewhere else. But I'm going to give it to Maya Angelou. She gets that one.
Yeah.
He also, speaking of quotes, came very close to quoting Larry Kalo's
I thought the
tagline.
same thing when I re-listened to this.
It's fun to be
Is he
fooled,
going to
but
quote Larry? So that was very nice. Larry Kalo, if you're just tuning in, is the proprietor of the Eagle Magic Store, which I believe, I don't think I'm overstating this, is the oldest continuing magic store in the continental United States.
I believe you're correct on that. Yeah. Yes, Larry always says it's fun to be fooled, but it's more fun to be the fooler.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in listening back on that, I never really watched Dallas, so I didn't, but I knew about the idea of who killed JR, and I know you never really watched The Masked Magician, did you?
I never did because it just I don't necessarily I kind of fall in line with your wife Amy, who's like, I don't want to know how it's done. I want to enjoy the magic. Essentially, I want to. I don't want somebody to pull that rug out from underneath me. Although I can tell you who shot JR, and I can only tell you because I took a trip to Dallas with some of my high school buddies recently, and in looking for things to do, we stumbled on the fact that you could tour the set of Dallas,
Huh.
and it's a ranch there that South Fork that you can. So we were immersed for 3 hours in Dallas, and what's funny about it, there are many funny things about it. If you remember any of it, the opening credits with that long drive sequence up to the house, they essentially faked all of that. There is no big long drive up to the house. The swimming pool where Bobby used to do his swimming looks when they show it like an Olympic-sized pool. It's not. It's a very small pool, and to show him swimming, they put a harness on him so that he couldn't make any progress, and he just swam, and then they edited that all together. It was very clever, but of course, the Who Shot JR came up, so I know, not from the show, but from the tour, Who Shot JR.
Boy, you could go to Dallas and just do a whole day of Who Shot tours.
Which is essentially what we did. We went from the Texas School Book Depository to South Fork. Who Shot and Who Shot, right back to back.
Wow. Anyway, it was great listening to Stan again. I'm glad he's still doing Magic Live. I have never gotten there. Have you ever gotten to Magic Live?
I have not. That's one of the ones that we should absolutely put on the docket.
Yeah, it just seems a little overwhelming to me. It just seems really, it'd be like going to Blackpool. It just seems
Yeah.
a little overwhelming.
Yeah, but I agree with you. If overwhelming for me, because I am not. I mean, it would be like trying to take a drink from a fire hose.
Yeah.
It's just so much, and I have such a finite understanding of most of it that I'd probably drown.
Yeah,
So,
well, we'll get to it someday.
Yeah, at
Someday.
some
That's
point.
what they keep
Yeah.
saying. Someday.
someday.
Wow. Anyway, it's time now to jump into the I Love It segment. I'm going to start because
You do start in
it's
this
my
one.
turn to start. And I'm going to recommend, I'm going to recommend a documentary I produced. But I didn't really produce it, but I mean, I contributed to the Kickstarter or GoFundMe. So, I mean, but I gave money. My name's in the closing credits, but so are, 300 other people.
Nice.
But it's a documentary about one of my favorite film directors, Hal Ashby, and it's called Hal.
What would we, if we're not you, what
Yeah.
would we know Hal Ashby from?
Well, you'll know him from Being There.
Oh, yeah.
You'll know him from Shampoo. You'll know
Yeah.
him from Bound for Glory. You'll know him
Nope.
from Coming Home.
Sure.
And then my favorite Hal Ashby movie, Harold and Maude.
Ah, now we get to it.
Now we get to it exactly. And this, the director of the movie, Amy Scott. In fact, I interviewed her for the other podcast. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can go over and listen to that interview. She's fascinating. She also had a huge love for Hal Ashby, and the love shows through in the documentary, in which people, the surviving people who work with him, talk about him with great affection.
I think the films of Hal Ashby have had an enormous effect on most of the great filmmakers that we admire.
The winner is Hal Ashby.
10 or 11 features, 7 in the 70s that are just an astonishing string of masterpieces.
I want to thank Hal Ashby for your courage.
Hal Ashby was obsessed with film. He'd smoke some pot and he would work all night.
It's still a little astonishing to me why he hasn't had his due.
I mean, that's all we have as filmmakers are our instincts. I have nothing else. In other words, what I feel about something, it's the only thing I know. The film will tell you what to do.
He brings to all of his movies an editor's eye and an understanding of how to keep things moving, which he does brilliantly in Harold and Maude, which I want to say much longer movie that they shot, and he whittled it away into the movie it became. He's just a really, really smart director and influenced just about every director working now, from like Edgar Wright to Noah Baumbach. Alexander Payne, if you've seen his movie The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti,
Yeah.
is a love letter to Hal Ashby. It is shot like a Hal Ashby movie. The credits look like Hal Ashby credits. There's even a Cat Stevens song in there. He just had a huge impact on people. So I recommend the documentary Hal. He didn't have a great upbringing. He had a sort of a troubled life, but when he was in his groove, he was in his groove. I believe it also includes some wonderful behind-the-scenes footage of him working with Dustin Hoffman in makeup, early makeup as Dorothy Michaels, because he was going to direct Tootsie. He didn't ultimately do that, but there's some footage of them working stuff out. So anyway, it's called Hal, the documentary, and there will be links in the show notes.
And for those of us not checking the show notes on a regular basis, Is it on any of the streaming platforms that we normally search?
It's here and there. You'd have to search for it, but you will be able to find it. You might have to pay for it, but it's well worth it. And I don't see any of that money, even though I contributed. None of that's coming to me. Anyway, that's my I love it.
All
What's
right,
yours?
and I do love that. It's fun, I think, always to find something like I didn't know Hal Ashby from Man in the Moon up until this discussion right here. So, and now knowing that you like him as much as you like him, and I like you as much as I like you, makes me think, well, I better give that a listen then, and so I will.
All right.
That'll go on the list. So, I'm a huge fan of Masterpiece Theater. We here at my house watch a lot of the Masterpiece Theater creations. They are always first rate in terms of their overall production value. So you can never go wrong. They may not all be ones that I would say, well, you got to see that, or you're done with me. But we have come to absolutely love the series All Creatures Great and Small.
Who's this?
James Herriot.
Harriet!
Siegfried's bark really is worse than his bite. Underneath it all, he's a good man. Stand up to him. He'll love you for it.
Up in the dales, surrounded by those hills. There's no place on earth like it.
Careful. Once it gets in your bones, it's hard to get out.
I'm not sure I want it to.
I remember watching the older version that was also a PBS a Masterpiece Theater production. But this new series, and I think there are 5 seasons now,
Okay.
and they're not very long. It's 10 or 12 episodes a season, but it is such a incredible cast telling gentle, loving stories. And the characters are so well drawn that it functions almost out of the gate as a character driven series that you don't really like. I think of other series that became character driven. You don't get that in the first season. It sort of develops into. I think of Cheers, for instance, which became a character driven. We knew those characters very well, but it wasn't there right out of the gate. It sort of evolved into that. This, on the other hand, was so character driven right out, and I just love the sweetness of it. I love the fact that there is a small Venn diagram of shows my wife and I will both enjoy at the same time. There are shows that we will watch together that one or the other of us enjoys and the other comes along. But this is one of those shows that we both really look forward to. And it, unlike me, who generally, as soon as a season would become available, I'd buy it and we would pile drive through the whole thing in 2 nights. We really don't do that with this series. I love it so much, and so does my wife, that we let it spin out over the course of whatever Masterpiece wants to give us, which is weekly on Sunday nights, which is when Masterpiece plays. But I can't recommend it highly enough. The acting is terrific. The stories are terrific. The only drawback in my house is one of the dogs, Ripley, is possessed with any portrayal of a dog on screen. And there's a lot of dogs in All Creatures Great and Small. Obviously, it's about vets. But I'm constantly having to say, Ripley, get down. It's a television show. Get down. And eventually, what's cool about it, and there's a couple other shows that we watch that have animals in it, Ripley will sit on the dog bed right in front of the TV and watch it. Just once he sort of gets over the fact that this is a TV show, I have pictures of him watching TV as if he's a human being watching TV. And he does it for a few shows. One of them is this particular series, All Creatures Great and Small. So I highly recommend it. I hesitate to recommend something that is so popular and so right now, because I'm sure most of our listeners probably have some knowledge of it or frame of reference. But if you are not watching it, or if you have not tumbled to it yet, I can't express my love for the show adequately, because it is so right in the middle of where I live, heart-wise. It just is terrific.
I will add it to our list.
You are not watching it?
We watch all things British. We just have not gotten to that. But I think because we watch so many crime things,
Yeah.
that having a softer thing to go to might be a nice little thing. And we've become so knowledgeable is not the right word, but we recognize so many different British actors that we like that it's always fun to see them pop up somewhere else and go, oh, that's the guy from
Ted Lasso, who there's-
yeah, exactly. You run into
pops
those.
up in this season. The guy who played in Ted Lasso as sort of the second banana behind Rebecca.
Oh, Higgins.
Yeah, Higgins.
He turns up a lot. He's in the
Well,
in
he's
that new
very
Mary,
good.
in that new Mary Poppins that they made a few years ago. He
Yeah,
was one of the
he's-
bad guys in that. He
He's very good.
pops up a
Everybody
lot.
in this show is very good. In fact, you and I both love Slow Horses,
Yes.
and the guy who sort of plays the prime minister.
Oh,
in-
yes.
Okay, he is the head veterinarian that James Herriot comes in to work with
Okay.
at the beginning of the series, and he's terrific.
Yeah.
And
all right.
the woman who plays the housekeeper turned up in the new Marvel Cinematic Universe release, and she's terrific. And the guy who plays James Herriot is terrific. And the woman who plays his girlfriend, now wife, is terrific. And it's so refreshing for me, I guess is the word, to see a show about good people, decent people, trying to do good, and not a lot of, sometimes my television experience is about bad people trying to get away with something. And so I'm very refreshed by this show, which is about good people trying to do good in the world and for each other. And there's enough character differences that the frictions and it's just so gentle and loving and wonderful. I can't recommend it highly enough.
I'm in. Totally in. Okay. That's
All
great.
right, let's read some books. I've gushed enough. I could gush over this book, but I won't. We're reading The Linking Rings. I read chapter 4 last time.
No?
No, I read chapter 5 last time. It's going so quickly, John.
Going
Even
very
I can't
fast.
keep up. Tell us a little, just recap chapter 5.
Sure. Chapter 5, Eli and Megan went to Leicester Square with Harry to watch his friend Jake in a play. Jake is a TV star who's now doing a play in England. If you spend any time in London, you're going to realize there's a bunch of American TV stars who like doing plays in London. He's doing A Pretty Taste for Paradox, which is a murder mystery in which the audience gets to decide who the killer is. At the end of the show, they see Jake briefly as he's heading out stage door to his limo, and he is quite surprised to see Eli. In fact, Harry says, I don't know if he's surprised or he's shocked. And that takes us right into chapter 6.
Chapter 6. The subway ride back to Hampstead Heath was a quiet one for the three of us. It might have been a product of our shared jet lag or a physical reaction to slogging through A Pretty Taste for Paradox. I was leaning toward the latter, and Harry must have agreed, for out of the blue he said, "It just didn't work." "What didn't work?" I asked. "The play we just saw," he said. still clearly annoyed by the experience. A mystery should have a solution, a single solution that is clean and clear and elegant, not 5 muddled solutions. Nonsense. It was just nonsense. And not even clever nonsense, I added. Not in the least, he agreed. We sat for several moments in silence, rocking with the movement of the subway car, and then a thought occurred to me. Of course, you've always been a fan of Anthony Berkeley's novel, The Poisoned Chocolates Case, and that mystery had how many solutions? 5? 6, he said. But that book was really more of a parody of the genre, don't you think? So was Jake's play. Not in the same class, he countered. It did not satisfy. Solving mysteries is in our DNA, I think. It's one of the few skills humans can hold over the other species. Our eyes are poor, we're not that strong, we can't run fast. Speak for yourself, I interjected, but he rolled right over me. But we can string together ideas, pieces of evidence to tell a story, to solve a mystery, he said. It's something McHugh and I have discussed at length from his perspective of a police investigation and my perspective of a magician creating a story for an audience. Our audience wants, needs, a satisfying solution to a story. Without it, they feel cheated. He looked up at me. Don't you feel a little cheated? I know I do. Sure, I said, smiling at him. But keep in mind, I paid for all 3 tickets, so if nothing else, I get to hold the title of most cheated. Let it so be bestowed, he said. I'm not sure why that made me feel better, but it did, if only a little. As we rode along, I began to think about the mystery we were in the midst of. Harry was a murder suspect. Someone wanted him or Oscar dead and, perhaps, didn't care which one it was. Both men were magicians and magi, and both appeared on that stage together the other night for the first time in 40 years? Why them? Why now? I mulled over these questions and others, reaching nothing resembling a conclusion by the time we had reached Hampstead Heath. Is that Dr. Harry Marks I spy, slouching toward Baxter's Folly? The voice was vaguely familiar, but the laugh that followed made it immediately clear that it belonged to Roy Templeton. The 3 of us turned in unison to see Templeton and his wife and stage partner, Roxanne, on the same path a few yards behind us. We were, as he had correctly observed, heading up the lane toward Lawrence Baxter's mansion. There was a smattering of stars in the sky and a half moon, but most of the ambient light seemed to emanate from the skyline of London, visible across the heath. Dr. Templeton, Harry said, clearly thrilled. I heard rumors of your presence in this vicinity, but no proof as of yet. Here's my proof, and I think it's safe to say it's at least 80 proof or better. I would expect nothing less, Harry said as the couple approached. Hugs were had all around, while Megan stood off to the side, trying to not look as awkward as she probably felt. Recognizing the imbalance, Harry and I quickly made introductions, and before long, all 5 of us were fast friends, slowly making our way up the charming lane toward the looming mansion. I had known the Templetons since childhood. Mine, not theirs. As I was growing up, our infrequent trips to their show in Las Vegas were always utterly memorable and instructive. As I furthered my studies of magic, I recognized how enlightening it was to see essentially the same show over the course of a number of years. The show didn't change much, but I did, and I watched it through different eyes every time. Their act was a cunning blend of comedy, magic, pantomime, and even elements of commedia dell'arte. Of course, I didn't recognize any of that until I was an adult. As a kid, I just found it a hilarious story about a married couple on stage who really seemed to despise each other. Until the end, when their onstage antics merged together to artfully demonstrate the enduring power of love. All this plus pratfalls, fart jokes, and balloon animals, a perfect storm of elements designed to appeal equally to kids and adults. Both Roy and Roxanne had always seemed ageless and timeless to me. Even at his now advanced age, Roy had lost none of his rubber-faced wackiness nor his dancer's grace. Roxanne was also winning in the battle against aging, although I suspected her jet-black hair required some chemical assistance, and her unlined face may have come courtesy of the occasional expensive nipping or tucking, or both. While Roy was exactly the same on stage or off, loud, boisterous, and always moving at 100 miles per hour, Roxanne's offstage persona was sharply contrasted to how she came across in their stage show. She never spoke during their act, but instead offered slow burn reactions to Roy's antics. The faster he moved, the slower she responded. So advanced was her comic timing, I had seen instances where she brought the house down with the merest shifting of her gaze from one point on stage to another. Nothing moved but her eyes, and it sent the crowd into hysterics. Little of that subtlety was evident in her offstage persona, which rivaled her husband's in energy and volume, with the body and welcome addition of a sharp, ribald take on life, which Roy lacked. As my late Aunt Alice used to say of her, Roxanne has no inside voice. She is all outside voice. They were, in short, a fun couple, undiminished by their advancing years, and their sudden appearance immediately increased the vitality of our late-night stroll.
Holy crap! Did Baxter give you a tour of the compound? Roxanne asked immediately. My first question after he showed us our bedroom was, "Thanks, Larry, but where's the gift shop?" If Roxanne doesn't find a gift shop, she'll make one, Roy added, setting off a laughing jag between the two. I brought in 2 suitcases, she continued, and the gal helping me pointed out one of the bags was empty. Don't worry, honey, I said. It won't be when I leave. And have you met Baxter's version of Brunhilde? Roy asked, lowering his voice dramatically and glancing nervously at the house. She's like Mrs. Danvers, without the warmth.
Exactly, right? I excitedly agreed.
There's a whole lot of scary packed in that little Teutonic frame, Roy continued. We ran into her first at the Magic Circle, Roxanne continued, and she read us the riot act about where we had stashed our cases. Then, to arrive out here and find out she's Baxter's Frau Blucher, well, I nearly wet myself. No nearly for me. I did, Roy responded, sending them both back into a laughing fit. Roxanne rubbed her eyes and then suddenly threw a chummy arm around Megan while we walked. You poor thing, she cooed, trapped in Cane Xanadu with a cluster of carny folk. Actually, I'm pretty used to it. I get it a lot at home with Harry and the Minneapolis Mystics, Megan said. Before our trip, I told her about the Templetons, and I think they were living up to my description. Megan moved closer to Roxanne. When they start talking about the efficiency of one invisible dove harness over another, she said in a stage whisper, I tune them out immediately. Wise girl, Roxanne said, and then turned to me. Don't let this one slip away, Eli. I'm doing my best, I agreed. Roxanne then turned back to Megan. I think my mother put it best when I told her I was marrying Roy. She said, a magician? Really, dear? Is that the best you can do? I was so hoping you'd hold out for a mime. She followed this with a dramatic pause, and then another paroxysm of laughter, which carried our small group up the long driveway toward the front door. We lowered our voices as we entered the large house, afraid our rollicksome party would wake the household. We needn't have bothered, as it appeared everyone was still wide awake and looked like they planned to stay that way for the foreseeable future. My excellent good friends, Lawrence Baxter said, coming out of his study when he heard the front door open. You have returned intact, I see, from your sojourns into the slums of the West End, and the shopping mecca known as Covent Garden. His tone and manner suggested that drinks all around had been offered and accepted several times in the last hour or so. Through the doorway into the large study, I could see the other magicians, Angus, Boris, Hector, and De Vries, chatting while a butler offered cigars from an expensive-looking wooden box. Baxter looked over at Roy, who bowed dramatically. "My lord." "What news?" Baxter said regally. "None, my lord," Roy responded, taking on a Shakespearean attitude, "but that the world's grown honest." "Then is doomsday near," Baxter answered in what sounded like a practiced routine, but Roy suddenly cut him off. "What the hell? You've started drinking before me?" Roy cried with mock outrage as he glanced into the study. "Yes, but not to worry. It took 5 of us to match your intake." "Fear not, I have ordered reinforcements," Baxter replied, gesturing toward a young maid who was heading toward us from the kitchen, carrying a tray with 2 more liquor decanters and a tea service. Pacing her was Miss Hess, who seemed to be directing the girl's every move. If she was going to be so picky about how things were done, I thought, why didn't she just do it herself? And then I realized the frail old woman was probably unable to carry the heavy tray. Instead, she clicked her tongue at the girl as she set the tray in the study and stopped to rearrange the placement of the decanters before they both exited silently. "Cigars and port, gentlemen?" Baxter said, looking first at Harry and then at me. "What about the ladies?" Roxanne said. "You'll have to get your own ladies," Roy said. Roxanne provided a quick rimshot sound effect, and the two laughed like the old comedy team they were. Roxanne turned to Megan. "Come on, honey. If we spend any time in there, we'll come out smelling like a wet dog on a humid day. Why don't we go upstairs and braid each other's hair?" Megan said reflectively, touching her hair. "I'm not sure." "That's code for there's a liquor cabinet in my room," Roxanne added as she headed toward the stairs. Megan nodded, finally understanding. "Got it," she said as she followed Roxanne. She turned back to me as she started up the stairs. "Don't wait up," she said, deftly stealing my next line before I could utter it. "But," I stammered as Harry patted me on the back and pushed me toward the study. "She's in good hands, Buster," he said, "and I, for one, could use a drink." As it turned out, Harry was not the only one in need of a drink, although it was his first of the evening. Some of the others might have lost count. Ever the good host, Lawrence Baxter filled glasses for the newest arrivals and refilled the glasses of those who were already warmly ensconced. The only detractor was Boris, who held up his hand at the offered glass and instead headed directly to the tea service. "Tea, anyone?" he suggested, looking around the group as he pulled a small leather pouch from within his suit coat. "Not if it's that awful swill you lug about," Angus shouted from his corner. "We have other options if it's tea you're after," Baxter suggested, but Angus shook his head and sipped his drink. Boris caught my eye as he opened the pouch and pulled out a tea bag. "Eli, a bit of tea," he said quietly. "It will, I think, aid sleep better than the other options here." Baxter had just pushed a full glass of port, whatever that was, into my hand. "No thanks," I said, not sure either choice was the right one for me. "I'm good." "As you wish," Boris said, as he placed the tea bag in an empty cup and poured in hot water from the tea set's china pot. The water turned instantly black. "You still keep that foul stuff under lock and key?" Angus asked as Boris slowly stirred the dark liquid. He added 2 lumps of sugar and continued stirring, then looked from Angus to me, probably seeing the confused look on my face. "Angus mocks me because I take precautions with my tea, always keeping it upon my person," Boris said. He turned to Angus as he continued. "As Angus is well aware, I often find myself sharing dressing rooms with unscrupulous sorts, otherwise known as magicians. They not only delight in stealing my tea, but in some cases go so far as to replace it with an odious substitute called Lipton's. He said the last word like he had a bad taste in his mouth, and given the look of the tea he was sipping, it may well have been the case. Angus burst out laughing. "Oh, when I did that, it was classic," he said. "Just classic." "Be that as it may, I learned a good lesson there, and now I'm wise enough to keep my valuables close to my heart," Boris said, patting his coat at the approximate spot where the pouch was located in an inside pocket. "And I have Angus to thank for that," he added, holding up his teacup in mock toast. Angus mirrored the action across the room with his glass of port. "Speaking of toasts," Baxter said somberly, "I think it might be appropriate to raise a glass to our fallen friend, Oscar." The room turned quiet with soft murmurs of agreement from all quarters. There was a moment of hesitation, as no one was quite sure who was actually making the toast. Since he had come up with the suggestion, Lawrence Baxter followed through and stepped to the center of the room. "For Oscar, a fine man, a fine friend, and a world-class magician." He held his glass up and looked around the small assembly. "To Oscar." We all held our glasses aloft and repeated, "To Oscar." "To Oscar," Davis DeVries added, a second too late. We all drank our port, except Boris, who sipped his tea. I sipped gingerly at my port as well, not wanting to be the drinking lightweight who ruined an emotional toast with an explosive coughing fit. As we drank in silence, I looked around the room, wondering, not for the first time, if any of the other magi might qualify as suspects for Oscar's murder. Lawrence Baxter had been there the night of Oscar's untimely death, as had DeVries, Boris, and Angus. They were all longtime members of the Magic Circle, and none of them would have been out of place wandering around backstage before a show. Hector and the Templetons might have been there as well. The crowd was large and I was jet-lagged, so I felt I shouldn't rule them out either. But rule them out for what? Murder? Really? The group had known each other for years, since long before I was even born, and there seemed to be such love and affection among them. However, as rivals in the same industry, I'm sure it couldn't have been all sweetness and roses all those years. "Would it be too soon," Roy Templeton said, snapping me out of my musings, "to perform a broken wand ceremony for Oscar at one of the performances this week?" "Oh, I think that's a lovely idea, Roy," Baxter said, and there were sounds of agreement all around. "Yes, we must schedule that. We also need to reschedule Harry's show," he added, glancing over at my uncle. "Only, of course, if you are still inclined." Harry shrugged. "From what they tell me, Larry, I'm not going anywhere for a while. I might as well put on a show while I'm here." "Harry could be the lucky magician to inaugurate DeVries' Catherine wheel," Roy Templeton suggested with a smirk, which produced laughter throughout the room. See, Hector agreed. "Harry can be the guinea pig." "I would pay top dollar to see that," Baxter said. "Well, that's because you can afford top dollar," Angus said with a laugh. "But I'd dearly love to see old Harry on that spinning devil." "There's no way he's strapping me to that contraption," Harry said over the laughter. "No damned way." I had to agree with him and hope no one would realize that as the youngest magician in the room by multiple decades, I was actually the logical choice. Although I hadn't seen the illusion in action, Harry had told me all about it on the flight to London because Davis DeVries had tapped him for some advice on the design. From what I'd heard, it was not a trick I would enjoy performing. As Harry had explained it, the Catherine wheel
was a large wheel about 10 feet in diameter, which stood upright on a support. During the performance, a magician was strapped to the wheel, looking a whole lot like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. In fact, Vitruvian Man was DeVries' original name for the device until Harry convinced him no one would get the reference. His second choice, Ixion, was also rejected, as Harry felt the average person had never heard of the Greek mythological figure who was secured to a spinning, burning wheel by Zeus. So they named the Catherine wheel, the popular spinning firework, not the less popular medieval torture instrument, one by default. Once the magician was strapped in, a motor behind the device would start to spin the wheel, slowly at first and gaining speed. As it turned, sparks and small flames would fly out of the end of the wheel's spokes, like the traditional spinning Catherine wheel used in fireworks displays. While the magician was being spun around and around, two assistants would stand in front of the wheel, grasping a large silk. At the same instant, they'd hold up the cloth to hide the magician from view, but only for a second. The assistants would then drop the silk, revealing that the wheel, still spinning and shooting out sparks and flames, was now empty. According to Harry, after the magician vanished from the Catherine wheel, there were then a couple of options to make him reappear. Depending on the layout of the theater, he could emerge standing in the back of the auditorium, or one of the assistants could wrap the other assistant in the silk very quickly and then just as quickly unwrap her, revealing she was transformed into the magician. Given what I knew about the device, if I were to perform the trick, I'd most likely be revealed backstage, on my hands and knees, saying goodbye to my dinner. As it turned out, I was saved from being volunteered for such debasement when DeVries began to vigorously shake his head and wave his arms from his corner of the room. "No, not Harry, not Hector, and God help me, not Lawrence," he said, still laughing from the suggestion. "I'm very pleased to say I have stumbled on to a bit of a coup, as it were, in regards to the premiere of the Catherine wheel. A big name has offered to help me with the unveiling." This produced a barrage of guesses as all the pros in the room tossed out their best guess as to who this mystery magician might be. DeVries smiled slyly while he shook his head at every idea. He waited until the last suggestion had been uttered. "No to all and sundry," he said in his clipped American accent. "Excellent guesses, but all 100% wrong. And the irony of it is, the fellow is among us at this very moment." He gestured grandly at Roy Templeton, who was leaning on a chair across the room. Roy looked around, as surprised as any of us, and then began to take a deep bow. "I'd like to thank the members of the Academy," he began. "Not you, you clown," DeVries snapped, continuing to wave his hand in a gesture we now understood as the international sign for idiot, "get out of the way." Roy stepped aside, revealing a television, which was playing silently in the background, and there on the TV, performing some card magic, was none other than Jake North. "Oh, heaven help us, not that silly prat," Angus said, practically spitting out the words. "I thought you said he was a big name," Roy said. "More like a big ass." Hector mumbled something in Spanish. I didn't understand the words, but the sentiment was unmistakable. "Criticize to your heart's content, my boys," DeVries said smugly. "But right now, he's the biggest thing in the West End, with a hit television series to boot. And people love him." He noticed the TV remote on the table next to his chair and picked it up. He studied the controls for a moment before selecting one button. Suddenly, the room was filled with the sound of Jake doing a card trick for a smiling television host. Something funny must have just been uttered, because all we heard when the sound clicked on was the recognizable sound of an audience laughing heartily.
Here's another thing about cards that's similar to dogs, Jake was saying. Sometimes they only know the one trick, and that's okay. A one-trick dog is no shame, and neither is a one-trick card. I mean, changing color is a pretty good trick all on its own. The host nodded in agreement as I got up and started to cross the room toward the television. Of course, Jake continued, on the other hand, maybe your card is the leader of the pack. In that case, it's easier to simply make the entire pack change color. With that, he picked up the table deck, flipped it over, and spread the cards, revealing the deck now had the same color backs as the host's card. The audience did more than ooh at this revelation. They practically screamed before breaking into thunderous applause. I was standing in front of the TV now, staring at Jake as he smiled his $1,000,000 smile at the camera. And then he turned and smirked at the audience as they applauded. I pivoted slowly and looked at all the magicians in the room. They were staring at me, clearly wondering what was wrong. That's my routine, I finally said when I found my voice. He stole my routine.
Wow.
Wow, yes. So it's interesting that on this episode where we're talking with Stan Allen about exposure, that's a big issue for magicians, but stealing of magic is another big issue, and that's what's happening here. Jake has stolen an entire routine from Eli. You know, we always hear that you tell young magicians you should copy your heroes to learn how to do this, and then you've got to grow out of that, and some don't.
You know, if memory serves, in our last episode where we talked with Damien, I don't think Eugene Berger's name came up. And we are almost out of this episode without
Oh
a
dear.
mention of
Okay.
Eugene Berger. So I will mention that I think the only reason Eugene was willing to work with me and willing to give me the inside scoop on how he did his show Hauntings was because I approached him and asked for permission and who's got the rights and who do I need to talk to. And that was such a foreign concept. At one point he said to me, you know, in general, if you can figure out how a magician does something, people just take it. And so the idea of asking for permission was so weird to him that he talked to me, and it led to a lot of the work that I do. So, yeah, if you can figure it out, stealing is a big part of magic.
Yes, it's not a good thing.
No.
Uh, and, you know, it's somewhat analogous to the stand-up comedy world, sort of, except there are standard tricks that magicians do, and the idea is to put your own spin on each one of them, as opposed to a stand-up comic literally stealing. You know, Milton Berle was famous, whether he did it or not, for stealing jokes. And more recently, Carlos Mencia was roasted for stealing jokes. If I think of it, I'll put in, there's a link to Mark Maron's WTF podcast, Mark Maron being a stand-up comic who got Carlos to sit down and confronted him on it and talked about why he thought it was fine what he was doing. Even Jay Moore has talked about, by the way, Jay Moore, terrific actor, should do more stuff. Really good actor. Anyway, he's talked about stealing a friend's routine when he was desperate to have something to put on when he was on Saturday Night Live. And Studio 60, Aaron Sorkin's version of SNL, did a whole episode about that. And I could even make Studio 60 I
We
love
could.
that at some point.
I flirt with that as being an I love that. The problem with me making it an I love that is I've already, I think, made Sports Night
Yeah.
and The West Wing I love that. It's just going to get a little incestuous at this point. Plus, I'll be honest, as much as I liked Studio 60, I did not love Studio 60.
Yeah, it never
Achieved its full promise.
It didn't, although it has much wonderfulness in it.
I agree.
It also has stuff that has not aged at all well.
Yeah.
All well. I don't think people are going to remember it to the same degree that they remember The Newsroom or West Wing.
Mhm.
So this is what Eli's dealing with. Jake has flat out stolen his routine and is doing it on TV.
Ouch.
And that's not a good thing. So we'll find out next time how Eli's going to deal with that. And next time we're also going to have one of the greatest conversations of all time. Well, I don't want to build it up too much, but she was so
You
much
just
fun.
did.
I
She
did
really
build
was.
it up, but I think
It's all
I
right.
think she lives up to it. We're going to
She
talk
really
to
does.
Sarah Saratoga Ballantyne, the daughter of the equally brilliant comedy magician Carl Ballantine. If you don't know who he is,
If you're listening to this podcast, my bet is you know who Carl Ballantine is.
and if you don't, you're going to learn because
Yeah,
he
absolutely.
was one of a kind. As I think I said in our interview with her, you say the name and I smile. And there's a limited number of performers. You say the name Larry Storch, I'm going to smile.
Yeah.
Say Carl Ballantine, I'm going to smile. Anyway, she talks about her dad's career. She talks about her own career. She talks about being on the board at the Magic Castle. She talks about magic.
And she also has a quote of her father's that I have memorized because I think it's one of the most wonderful things I've ever heard in my life.
And we'll save that for
Yeah,
next time.
I won't tell you what it is. You're going to have
No.
to tune in.
But it did change your life. Yeah, we'll talk with the lovely and amazing and hilarious Sarah Ballantine. And we will listen to Chapter 7 of The Linking Rings. Until then, take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening, folks. Come back soon.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.